Okay, so there's three of us. So two of us from the BBC, and also Okay, so I'll start. Okay, so we created this thing called the Living Room of the Future, which I'm going to whiz through really quickly. Just give you an overview of what it is, and then we'll kind of give you some of the feedback we got from people. So, best thing to do is just show you a video to whet your appetite.
What do you see? People and things moving through space. Moving world still forever. Something below this human surface. The constant vibration of reality. Outside of our reflection. What is it? A human movement in the shadow of chaos. Constructed out of chaos. A structure built out of the unknown.
Okay, if that got you a little bit excited, or wondering what on earth was that. Okay, so the living room is the environment. It's both driven and adapted by personal data. And funny enough, the last speaker talked about kind of client-side stuff, and that's actually how we built this. So it's using the data that's contextual in the room to change and adapt the media and the devices around you. But none of the data actually leaves that living room. There we go. So how's this work out? So yeah, as I just said. So we actually built an actual living room, and we set it up in a place called Fact in Liverpool. So here's a quick video. It might be a bit loud, but okay. Don't know what that means. That's all right, I'll skip forward. So this is how you basically, this is kind of like one of the core bits of it, is that there's a screen in front of you, and we'll talk more about the screen and stuff like that in a minute. But that kind of, alongside the bigger screen, gives you an idea about what's actually happening, because it can be quite abstract, the video you see. So it kind of makes it very clear that this is the stuff that's coming through and the room sensing. So why the living room? Well, yeah, it's a connected space. Most people have a living room of some kind, or a space where they contribute, they sit down and relax. It's also a sensitive space, so it's personal. You kind of don't really want cameras in that living room. You may want to kind of maybe fall asleep in that living room, or you don't want some camera watching you. And there's existing hierarchies, social hierarchies in that space. So maybe if you're family or if you're friends, and so someone grabs the remote and someone doesn't, and someone sits in a certain place, stuff like that. It's also it's a great space for small audiences, because one of our core research is about groups of people. A lot of the data we're talking about is very much my data, but we've already started to allude to the fact what happens when there's multiple people are involved. What about the living rooms data? How does that work? So it's a kind of screenshot from one of them. Let's start from the view of it. So this is kind of the basic view you normally see. So you have the screen and then the other screens, and then there's devices. So just a rough idea of what it looks like. So this is just me and the GoPro sitting on the sofa. So what you have is, you see like the blind going up. That goes up automatically at a certain time based on what's happening on the screen and what's happening in the living room. Also the lights are changing. So lights are meant to reflect daylight, stuff like that. It's a very small room as well. We're reflecting the way that our living rooms are getting smaller and smaller. So, the next one. So which IoT devices did we start using? So we used the Dyson fan. All these devices we could tap into. They're not like, for example, someone asks, well, why is there not an Alexa? Why is there not a Google Home there? because those things require that it goes to the cloud, and then you talk to the cloud before you can do anything with them. You can tap into these devices straight without having to go via some third party or via a cloud. So there's lots of different devices. So one of the things we have is that these mats are actually NFC. So when you pick up the water, it knows you picked up water, so it knows you're hydrating. Yeah, we also have stuff like the Oyster card, which then makes a change to the media based on if it gets picked up. And the same for, there's a book which talks about a bit about the film, and is using NFC to understand that you're interested in knowing more about that. So the question is that I think this is one of the key parts, is how is it built? It's really hard to describe in a short way, in like one slide, but we have this thing called OBM, which is a BBC thing, object-based media, and it allows you to adapt media. And if you want to talk about that, I can talk about that all day if you want me to. But we also have, so we've been doing lots of work around that, lots of research, but the key thing about it is also we want to adapt the media based on data, but we want to use your personal data, but we want to do it in a way that's ethical. So this is why we started looking at HDI, which Lianne's going to talk more about in a minute. And we started using this thing called Data Box, which we can also talk about if you want to. And then that also can talk to the physical space, so it can talk to hue lights and stuff like that. So, if you're interested, this is a little bit about Data Box. I know that the term Data Box got thrown around a lot. This is what we mean by Data Box. If you want to know more, there's a link, and I'll share the slides once I get back to my laptop, so we can talk more about it. And I think that's where I hand over.
Okay, so we built a living room of the future, but it was more than just an experience, and we had two aims. So the first was to provide a future living room experience where it was predicated on the use of people's data. It was driven and adapted by personal data. But also we used this as a real piece of research and a probe in which to dig a bit deeper into people's attitudes around this idea of a data transaction. So within the field of human-computer interaction and user experience, there's a new kind of school of thought and emerging research area around human data interaction, HDI, which is essentially how we understand data transactions in terms of I give a bit of data, what do I get back for that data? And underlying all of this, the principles underlying HDI are that of privacy, control, agency, legibility, accountability. So it's about an ethical use of personal data. So we use the living room of the future to explore what people thought about using their personal data in this sort of new and novel media experience-driven way. But also, as Ian pointed out earlier, we wanted to do it in terms of understanding this on a small group basis. So we offered the experience between 1 and up to 3 people. We did this on our ethical trusted data platform, DataBox, and we wanted to dig a bit deeper into understanding what people's concerns were in terms of using their data in this sort of way. So there's concerns relating to issues such as privacy, control, transparency. So whilst designing the experience, we used the HDI elements within the experience. So as we were outlining all of the IoT objects that we wanted to use in this space, we looked at ways in which we could make it transparent that something was happening with the data. So the data was being used in a certain way, and then an IoT object was either adapting or changing depending on what was happening within the room. So using this ethical design approach, we were guided by 2 key questions. So how could we communicate a change had happened in the environment, but also what was the best method in which we could show people and make it aware that explicit data was being used to drive a change within this environment. So we used the HDI elements, and there was lots of different ways in which we could go about making it explicit and transparent to people. And we aligned it together with the storyboards. And then, as Ian mentioned, the main mechanism in which we did this was through using a data monitor, which essentially in its simplest form was a data input, data output mechanism. So for example, when people entered the room and sat down, because of the sensors on the sofa, the film automatically started playing. So then on the monitor it would say, sit back, relax, enjoy the film. As people picked up a water bottle, the monitor would say, keep hydrated, and those sorts of things. And then at the end of the experience, we offered a data receipt which outlined everything that people did within the room, such as whether they drank the water, whether they picked up the objects within the room, and how many times the light changed, and various elements such as that. And in terms of feedback, there was this very mixed idea of a utopia versus a dystopian type of future. Some people really liked it and thought it wasn't far dissimilar to what they were used to within their own home, but a lot of other people found it very distracting, very this idea of a dystopian, horrible future. So these are just some of the kind of feedback, and I'm going to pass over to Neelima to talk more detail.
I'm not necessarily comfortable giving away my data.
Right, thank you. So I'm going to talk about the results of the living room as a research probe. So basically, it was a magical experience. People found it immersive, engaging, nostalgic. So people loved it. In fact, they wanted more. They wanted this to kind of extend beyond just the living room into their kitchens maybe. So if there's like a cooking show, they wanted their hobs, their stoves, their appliances to kind of be temperature regulated, to trigger alarms, to do everything automatically for them, basically a utility, right? So this is definitely the broadcast of the future. But there are a lot of challenges and barriers here. Users have a reluctance in kind of adopting these into their everyday lives, into their personal spaces. And let's look at what the living room has to kind of probe in those areas. The first, of course, was privacy, talked about a lot today, I can see through all the discussions. Why is it important in the context of broadcast, especially for the BBC? It's because of the reach. And it's not just about the number of people, but it's where media is being consumed. It's in very private, personal spaces. So the data associated with media consumption in the context of the home is increasingly sensitive as compared to other kinds of data. So when you share that kind of data with third parties, which was a lot of fear instigated by recent incidents with like Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, which often came up, which is kind of instilled this kind of fear in a lot of the users. They think that there are a lot of things happening behind their back as far as service providers are concerned and their data. And they feel like a lack of transparency is there, which is what is kind of leading them to not trust these kind of technologies. So you can see the couch became suspicious. That's not a very healthy situation to have in your home. The second one is, of course, agency. To be able to do things in these kind of situations, agency through control. Let's start with data control first. So data control begins with awareness, moving on to negotiability. So to be able to not just say yes or no, but to be able to make granular choices. Thank you. So users want to be able to do that, and they want to, once they know and they choose, they want to be able to kind of exercise control in an informed and active fashion. And with respect to broadcast, it's not just about control of data, but implicitly control over the experience through the data as well. So if you're on YouTube, your data is being used to kind of constantly recommend programs to you. So the kind of content that you consume, users fear them to be like in an echo chamber or within a filter bubble. They don't want to do that because they feel like they're losing autonomy over their life when they invite these kind of technologies to their homes and to their living rooms. And the first two concerns kind of bleed into the third one, which is, of course, loss of trust. The World Economic Forum, a lot of academia, industry research, all of that kind of talks about trust a lot. And we believe in ethical data practices, being legally compliant, and being socially accountable as the ways to kind of respond to these. So in our project, we use human data interaction. We use the data box, which kind of locally processes all of your data and kind of black boxes it within your home as a solution to it, but there are a lot of other alternatives that people from different disciplines could come together and look into for your particular context. Thank you.